Welcome to Strange History, where we delve into the strange and wonderful history of our world. Today we delve into the most iconic music event ever to happen, Woodstock. Some of the most popular acts included Jimi Hendrix, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Janis Joplin, The Grateful Dead, Joe Cocker, and Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. Here are some facts about Woodstock you may not know. The Woodstock's organizers originally wanted to build a studio, not host a concert. In fact, only one of the four men who threw the party of the century had any experience helming a music festival. Earlier that year, Florida-based promoter Michael Lang had organized a concert in Miami that drew 40,000 people, the largest concert in history up to that time. Lang's friend, Artie Cornfield, worked for Capitol Records, but had never worked on anything the size of Woodstock. Their partners had even less experience. John Roberts and Joel Rosenman were the Ivy League-educated sons of wealthy businessmen, and Roberts was the heir to a pharmaceutical fortune. The group came together when Roberts and Rosenman, looking for investment opportunities, agreed to back Lang and Cornfield's ideas for a recording studio in Woodstock, New York, a popular arts community in the New York's Ulster County that was home to musicians Bob Dylan, the band, Jimi Hendrix, and others. The four men soon abandoned the plans for the studio, however, and instead decided to throw a large outdoor rock festival. They kept the Woodstock name because of its connection to Bob Dylan, though Dylan himself never played at the festival, surprisingly enough. The festival actually took place 70 miles from Woodstock in Bethel, New York. Unable to find a suitable spot in Woodstock itself, the organizers signed a deal to hold the festival in an industrial park near Wallkill. However, when local officials began to realize that the festival was expected to draw 50,000 people, they balked and just a month before the concert passed a law prohibiting the event. The organizers were then approached by Elliot Tiber, a motel owner from Bethel, New York, who offered the use of his farm, which was quickly deemed too small. Tiber, however, introduced them to his friend, Max Yasker, who finally agreed to lease them 600 acres of his sprawling alfalfa farm for $75,000, with the estimates of the crowd size now surging well past 50,000. Yasker faced increasing pressure from local residents and the business communities to cancel, but he refused to renege on a deal he had made with the Woodstock organizers. Richie Havens was not meant to be the first performer. With Sweetwater, the concert's first scheduled performer, still stuck in traffic, organizers scrambled to find a replacement, finally selecting folk singer Richie Havens. Havens started his set just after 5 p.m. on Friday afternoon, and by some accounts continued playing for nearly 3 hours. Every time he tried to leave the stage, organizers convinced him to keep playing, as they still hadn't rounded up the next act. When Havens began to exhaust his repertoire, he threw in a few Beatles covers before finally improvising a new song, Freedom, on the spot to close out his epic set. Havens was finally allowed to leave the stage after a U.S. Army helicopter, chartered by the organizers, arrived with additional performers aboard. The music nearly came to a halt on Saturday night. Just hours into the festival, Woodstock organizers were hemorrhaging money. The sheer number of attendees and the logistics for collecting money and tickets at the gates had forced them to abandon the idea of a for-pay concert and instead let everyone in for free. In addition, they were forced to spend tens of thousands of dollars contracting helicopters to transport food and supplies and the musical acts to and from the site. Weeks earlier, in an effort to attract music's biggest stars to the festival, Woodstock's organizers had agreed to pay some artists more than twice their going rate. And on Saturday, many of them demanded that they be paid in cash before going on stage. Fearful of what the crowd would do if the music came to a halt, organizer John Roberts agreed to use his trust fund as collateral for an emergency loan. Organizers finally convinced the manager of a local bank to open up close to midnight on Saturday to get them the funds. Jimi Hendrix was the headliner at Woodstock, but few people actually saw him perform. Hendrix was one of those artists who demanded his fee, nearly $200,000 in today's money, in advance. He spent much of the weekend wandering around the festival grounds, despite the fact that he was scheduled to be the final performer. By Sunday, it was clear that the announced schedule had gone off the rails, with acts finally appearing hours after their intended start times. However, due to a clause in Hendrix's contract that stipulated that no act could perform after him, Organizers were unable to move him to Sunday evening slot. By the time Hendrix took the stage at 9 a.m. on Monday morning, most of the festival goers had headed home and missed Hendrix's set, including his legendary rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner. Martin Scorsese cut his chops working on the Woodstock documentary. Just days before Woodstock began, organizer Artie Cornfield struck a deal with Warner Brothers Studio to film the festival for a possible release as a documentary film. Director Michael Wadley hastily assembled a crew, including the future award-winning director Martin Scorsese, a recent NYU film graduate with only a handful of credits to his name. Over the course of 3 days, Wadley and his crew shot over 120 miles of footage, which Scorsese and others eventually edited down to 3 hours for release. The film went on to win an Academy Award and became one of the most profitable films of all time. But Cornfield's deal, which gave financial control to Warner Brothers, meant Wadley and Scorsese received little money. The most famous song about Woodstock was written by someone who wasn't even there. At the insistence of her then-manager David Geffen, Canadian singer Joni Mitchell had been booked to appear on the popular Dick Cavett show on Tuesday after Woodstock. Geffen, fearful that Mitchell would be unable to make it back to New York in time, refused to allow her to attend the concert. Mitchell had to settle for watching the events unfold on television. Mitchell made it to the Dick Cavett show, but so did several other artists who had traveled up to Yozger's farm, including Jefferson Airplane and the newly formed rock supergroup Crosby, Stills, and Nash & Young, who had made one of their first public appearances at the concert. Band member Graham Nash, Mitchell's boyfriend at the time, vividly describes the weekend's events, leading Mitchell to pen a new song, Woodstock, which even many attendants felt perfectly captured the experiences of those who attended the festival. There were 3 deaths at Woodstock, but no confirmed births. 3 young men died while attending Woodstock, 2 from a drug overdose, and another, just 17 years old, was run over by a tractor collecting debris while he was asleep in a sleeping bag. For decades, rumors have swirled that several women gave birth while at the festival. No births were recorded at the site itself, but 8 miscarriages were. When the festival was finally over, the New York State Department of Health recorded 5,162 medical cases over the nearly 4 days, 800 of which were drug-related. That weekend, Bethel was the 3rd largest city in the New York state. Feeding nearly 500,000 people was a logistical nightmare. Members of the Hog Farm, a New Mexico-based commune initially hired to help keep the peace, quickly switched gears, recruiting new temporary members on the spot to help cook and serve to the masses. When a local Jewish community center heard about the food shortages, they too sprung into action, supplying thousands of sandwiches that were eventually flown into the area from a nearby Air Force base. It took decades for the Woodstock organizers to turn a profit. All told, Roberts, Rusma, Lang, and Cornfield spent nearly $3.1 million, which is $15 million in today's money, on Woodstock, and just took in $1.8 million. Roberts' wealthy family agreed to temporarily cover the enormous costs, providing they were repaid. But it wasn't until the early 1980s that Rosenman and Roberts were finally able to pay off the last of their debt. At Woodstock, there was only 1 toilet for every 833 people. Established food vendors didn't want anything to do with the festival, mostly because of its projected size. So organizers settled for 3 dudes who called themselves Food for Love and had almost no experience as vendors. By mid-Saturday, they were running out of food, so they did what any self-respecting capitalist would do. They quadrupled their hot dog prices from 25 cents to $1. And then a bunch of peace-loving hippies burned them down. They were annoyed because of the long lines and the outrageous prices. Happily, the day was saved by a group called the Hog Farm Collective, who passed out thousands of cups of granola and saved everyone from starving to death. Here's another fun fact about Woodstock. Kids actually burned their eyeballs at Woodstock. There was a nurse at Woodstock who reported that burned eyeballs were actually a thing at the festival, and that they appear to have resulted from kids who were on LSD who would lie down on their backs and just stare at the sun. Eventually, it was enough of a problem that there was a whole medical area devoted to treating burned eyeballs. And finally, the Grateful Dead was one of the worst acts at the festival. Even Jerry Garcia's friend, Phil Siganar, couldn't be charitable, later declaring it was the worst show of theirs he'd ever seen. Perhaps it was because they were standing in water and being electrocuted that played part in their terrible performance. Well, this is another episode in the can, and if you like puns, stay tuned for another episode of Strange History next Tuesday. This podcast was produced by Dead to Me Productions, and I, of course, your host, Amy Domestico, hammered out this episode. Big thanks to Spreaker for being such a great podcasting platform. Love you guys.